Hey everyone, thanks a lot for joining us for the Managed Stage Kickoff for 12.10, which is GitLab's next release, releasing April 22nd, 2020. I'm joined here by the rest of the product team here on the Managed Stage. Really excited to talk you through a few really exciting issues that we're working on for the next release. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And this time we're actually doing this as a team. So each one of us is going to represent and talk through some of the issues that we're excited about and we're planning on attacking. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to talk you through a couple of issues that we're working on the access group. And the first one is, as I share my share screen button, is optionally disabling group membership inheritance. And this is a problem that is especially prominent on GitLab.com, where currently group membership, we operate with a forced inheritance model, where subgroups will always inherit all of the memberships from parent groups. And this makes it really easy for you to kind of manage members within the application, because you simply add members to the top level group and then trust that they have access to all the subgroups and all projects underneath it. But for some organizations, especially those on .com, this becomes really challenging for them to manage projects and groups that they might not want the entire group to see. So this has actually taken us some time to get to an MVC. But right now, our goal is to ship an MVC for this feature that introduces configuration at the top level group level that allows you to define whether or not you would like the membership for that group to be inherited. So again, this option is in the first iteration is only going to be available for top level groups. So if you are a top level group on GitLab.com, the goal is that you'll be able to enable an option for within your group settings that allows you to define membership individually for each of your subgroups. So here, subgroup A could be named something like production applications or all team, where all members will go in. But if there is a certain executive group where they have projects that you want to keep kind of separate with a separate membership group, that's a subgroup or a sub list of everyone in subgroup A, you can go ahead and do that by creating subgroup D and defining those members differently. Like I mentioned, we've been investigating this for a while, but we're really excited about this. Especially for enterprises where privacy and security are particularly important. The other issue that I'm kind of excited about is this restrict instance membership changes to a single user. So, what some organizations, especially enterprise organizations, may use a identity and access management system with as kind of like a middleware solution for managing their identities from an identity provider and using this as a single source of truth. Well, we want to make it easy for you to kind of integrate and use those types of systems with GitLab. So what we plan on doing is doubling down on the fact that many of our customers will use service users. Essentially, they'll designate an admin user as the user that is able to kind of make these changes, and then actually lock down membership changes to that designated user. So that if you have an integration or if you have an external system that you want to make responsible for all membership changes, if you're using a vendor like SailPoint or Savient, you can designate a single admin user, create a series of scripts and connections with whatever external system that you're using, route them all through that designated user, and then trust that all other users on your system are unable to kind of change and reconfigure membership, that you have a single source of truth and a single user where all those changes kind of flow through. So we think that both of these kind of issues, both the optionally disabled group inheritance and then the restricting membership changes to a single user, both going to be really kind of important changes to really help enterprises thrive, especially those that are sensitive to security and compliance needs. So I'll pause there. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any other thoughts? Matt, I know this is something that your customers have been excited about. Did that issue kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think it addresses the at least specific pain point that comes from one of my recent discussions. So I'm excited for it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, y'all.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
On the previous issue, you were talking about the subgroups inheritance. Mm-hmm. It mentions in the issue that in order to reduce scope, that we're only doing this for the top level parent group. Is it really that much extra scope to add that for each group underneath that? I'm just wondering why that decision was made.
Yeah. So, this behavior was introduced into GitLab a really long time ago, and we made the assumption that this inheritance would always be the case. So we made a number of engineering decisions with that assumption. So one of those is the use of basically an engineering technique called recursion in all of our all these membership calls, so that we just automatically assume and then pull from the continue like pulling membership members from higher and higher groups until we run out of room. Because of this, it makes it really hard for us to break that assumption, and so we have to kind of change the way that our membership logic works. There's other places where this logic kind of lives, like in autocompletes, for instance. Like when you're typing in, like in the search bar for like a particular author, it is using that same logic to pull from every single group and all the members in all the parent groups above. So it's one of those things that it seems like, when I first thought about it, I thought that's kind of something very similar. But as we dug into the engineering kind of effort, it was actually going to be pretty significant. So by constraining it to just the top level groups, we can kind of retain that recursive approach and then just have an exception for the top level group that allows us to kind of modify that logic, but not break it completely. So that's the feedback that I've gotten from the engineering team. If there are other ideas on like how to navigate this problem, I'd love to hear about them, or I'd love to get more feedback on that. But thus far, I've been unable to kind of find a smaller MVC, just because I've definitely heard from customers that it's like, the problem that we want to solve is for GitLab to not do the exact thing that it is doing. And it's kind of hard to solve that problem without unwinding the existing behavior. So that's going to help us influence the approach.
Thanks, that makes sense. I wonder if it would be helpful if there was an issue opened for adding the same functionality to subgroups that also have nested groups within them, so that there is somewhere for people to go, rather than lots of people might create multiple issues of that if it doesn't end up being a need.
Do you think that's going to be a need? Is that something that you've heard from your customers?
I haven't heard anything specific. I just like reading through the issue that you were showing us. I anticipate that that's something that was the first question that came to mind, is like, why would we only choose the top group if there is a group underneath that's maybe being used by a different team, and they might have the same problem, but it's just a smaller version of that problem.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm going to do with this is we're still refining the engineering path forward. Once we kind of get a ton of confidence in that, I am going to start circulating this a little bit more throughout the product team, because it is going to, I think that, the configuration, the convention over configuration kind of question is always something that we need to kind of think about. And and this is introducing a more complex way of configuring kind of like your group that might not be readily obvious. And I think in those cases where we are making that kind of a decision, or like going down an engineering path that is going to be a little bit, expensive, it's useful to kind of run things up the chain and discuss them a little more widely. So I'm gonna take that step.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks for the question. I really appreciate it.
Jeremy, I have a quick question too.
Yeah, please.
Was the use case that you saw the use case you're solving, or the use case that is more prevalent, the one where there are some people that should be prevented from accessing an area, or is it always going to be a group of people that together should be restricted? So is the use case like I have some individuals I want to kind of restrict access, versus I always want to do it to a defined group? What was the most prevalent?
I think it's less. So the use case that comes most readily in mind is a large telecommunications company that has thousands of users, but they want to have a certain subgroup of projects that is only available to a few dozen of those users. So a privileged subgroup of the general populace, basically. So that it's the executive team that is responsible for product launches or making like significant decisions. So you could frame it as, we want to exclude the general populace from just this certain group, or we want a this several dozen users to be part of this group, but that's generally the use case I'm most familiar with. And then from others, I hear something similar, which is that basically we have an executive group or like a small, tiger team that is responsible for some sensitive project matter, and we want to make sure that no one else can see it. They shouldn't know who's in the group. They shouldn't be aware that it even exists.
The scenario that I'm most familiar with is hedge funds, where there's a small group that owns the algorithms and nobody else can see the algorithms.
Yep. Makes total sense. Makes total sense.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks a lot for the great questions, y'all. I really appreciate it. I like talking about this stuff. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit through those two issues on Axis, I'll move over to analytics. So analytics is kind of moving in a very exciting direction, where we've kind of created this new framework and new thinking around value stream management. And we'd like to go ahead and start investing kind of in that direction, and then building out the rest of our kind of like analytics capabilities from there. So the first issue is one that we may have talked about in a previous release, Kickoff, and that's adding lead time and cycle time to value stream analytics. So right now, value stream analytics, I'll go ahead and click on that page. It provides you with an overview of your kind of the stages that we've already predefined for you here within the application, from issue through staging, and rolls it up to a total kind of lead time, kind of median KPI. This is useful, but this stage doesn't make it particularly clear in terms of which metrics are really the most important, and like what is the measurement of success, and it doesn't use kind of industry standard language for what people would like to see out of this page. And I think we want to take this first step towards this by introducing lead time and cycle time specifically into this page by calling them out in this container here in the top of this. So where lead time is kind of the initiation and eventual like completion and delivery of product, whereas cycle time is when you actually, an engineer actually like begins production and then actually completes that work product. We want to actually introduce both of these into this page. You're able to eventually visualize these over time, see which aspects of your value stream are influencing this the most, and then so you can kind of double click into them and see bottlenecks. But I think the first step is just simply introducing this as a number, and then showing this on this page for folks to kind of take advantage of. We're doing more with this over time. There's this epic here, show the DevOps lifecycle and value stream analytics, and I'll talk a little bit about the actual visualization of the lifecycle in a minute. But you can see that we actually want to iterate towards introducing a number of these categories, these kind of KPIs on the value stream page, so that you can understand them, track them over time. And we're starting with lead time and cycle time as kind of the first step. The next thing that I'm really interested in is visually depicting value stream analytics as a flow. So, like I showed you on that previous page, value stream, this is useful in itself because it does kind of provide a out-of-the-box value stream in terms of how information and work product is kind of flowing through GitLab, but it doesn't really depict it as a stage, as an actual flow. So each of these stages are kind of laid out kind of vertically, where you're able to click into each one and then show different KPIs and time durations for each of these. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to see if it resonates with customers to actually like arrange these as a flow. So each one of those stages that I just highlighted, issue, plan, code, and test, what we want to do is we want to lay them out with chevrons on the top and allow you to eventually, in a future iteration, click into each to be able to understand them a little bit more. So why I think this is really interesting is, we're able to start telling a visual story of like what the value stream analytics does for your organization. Test and see if these are actually this is the right terminology to actually use with customers. We're not really sure if we've gotten the stages right. We want to validate that this is working for customers, and then to see how customers actually start using this, if their behavior changes at all. We actually lay this out visually. So again, this is mostly right now in its current, we're still in discussions with engineering on the specific approach, but the idea is for this to just be front end only, just test with the existing stages that we have, and then see how customers kind of respond. And the last thing that we're kind of trying to finish off is this group level activity overview MVC, which we started in 12.9 and we're finishing off in 12.10. And this is a simple MVC that adds recent activity in a group by introducing MRs created, issues created, and I believe the count of new members added to the group within the last 90 days. Why we think this is interesting is one problem that we tend to hear from customers is that they don't really understand how their users are really using GitLab. And one customer has showed me a report where they run a report themselves of like all the groups that they have on their instance, and then how many MRs are they creating, how many security scans are they doing, how many pipelines are they running. And they really think about return on investment as just simply usage. It's like, are people doing things with the product? And so this is like a small step forward to start showing that information at the group level. And then in a future iteration, we can think about aggregating all the group level information up into a single report so that someone can take this information, show it to their CTO and say, look, people are getting a lot of value out of GitLab. They're creating merge requests, they're creating issues. And it becomes a really easy conversation to justify what kind of value it's adding to your organization. So those are the three things I'm pretty excited about and looking forward to. But there's lots more in store for the analytics group, and I'd love to hear any feedback on kind of what I just talked through.
I have a question on the very last one.
Yeah.
All of the stuff for analytics looks really cool. For the issues, MRs, and users added in the last 90 days, are we storing that data anywhere? Like for it to be are we storing it somewhere so that we can add on to it rather than it just being overwritten? Like in order for us to be able to pull a report and say that this is how this data has changed, like 90 days to 90 days.
That's a cool question. Thanks. So we actually started off with this issue a lot more ambitiously, where we had the ability to slice and dice it over time, and then there were 6 metrics, and we eventually distilled them down to just those 3. The reason is that we're not storing this data anywhere right now. We're just pulling those queries like when you visit the page. And the reason for that is because we're still trying to figure out on analytics what the best way of storing this time series data is that's going to be performant over time. Because you're totally right. Like the next request out of that comes from this is going to be, I want to see this over time. I want to be able to visualize this stuff. And right now you can't. And we're still we're doing some exploration engineering work to understand whether or not like Prometheus or another like data store is going to be a good way to do it. Because right now it's a challenge to make it work with Postgres, with the database that we're using already with GitLab. So I think it's a great point. I totally agree that like we're definitely going to get requests to see this over time and to do more interesting things with the reports. So this kind of gets us something we can validate with our customers while we figure out those questions, and then allows us to get to some of that like in a future iteration. But I think that was super observant. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, no worries.
Somewhat related, I have a question for you about like what are the thoughts you've had or given to this seemingly recurring theme from customer conversations recently, that they like the idea of API driven kind of everything. And so 2 recent conversations come to mind about how they talked about being able to import their own data to GitLab dashboards to be able to aggregate everything in one place, ideally. But then is this stuff available via API to be pulled out? And just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 questions that I'm still trying to understand. One is what is going to be the data store that we use, because that's going to influence what data we make available. And then 2, what data do we make available? Like we can't just API all the things and kind of go from there. Like if we are using like Prometheus, there are ways that we can expose that information that are a little more that are going to be straightforward, but it's not as straightforward as just going to be adding an API endpoint and you can just return all the things from that. So I think it's really I think the dependent challenge is figuring out whether or not we're going to use Prometheus or Cortex or InfluxDB or something else. But I think that you're right. Solving that problem of like being able to create like an event stream or have this or expose this data so that you can ingest into some other tool is going to be really important. This is especially a challenge for .com because you can ship your logs off to Elasticsearch or something if you're like self-managed, but you can't do that on GitLab.com. And so it constrains the dashboards that you're able to kind of create there. So I think it's a great point. It's something that John Mason and I are going to have to keep in mind, but I think it's kind of dependent on that engineering question. And also we'll dig into that with customers once we kind of have a path forward there to understand. It's like, cool, what kind of dashboards do you want to start building? How can we expose that data? And we can kind of iterate from there. But I don't have a great sense right now of like that question. But but thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Sweet. Thanks a lot, y'all. Luca, I think you're up next. I think you're going to talk a little bit about extending group managed accounts, which is awesome. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So a little bit of context on group managed accounts for those of you who have not heard of this feature before. This is about to be released from behind a feature flag once we've finished the testing that the Access group has been doing on it. So what it is it's currently connected to our SSO SAML configuration. So in order to enable group managed accounts, you have to configure and enable SAML SSO. So you need an identity provider to be able to utilize this feature. So you already have the ability to manage your users' accounts through your identity provider, but that doesn't mean that you're able to fully manage their accounts through your GitLab.com group. So for example, a user may be part of your group and they may also be a member of your identity provider, but that user is a user on GitLab.com. So they may be able to go and do other things on GitLab.com if they want to outside of your group. So the goal of group managed accounts is to allow better isolation and control over those users for group owners. So isolation and control are the two main problem areas that we're trying to focus on at the moment in the Spaces group. And one thing that we're actually focusing on now that group managed accounts is about to be released as it currently is, which is connected to SAML SSO, is we want to be able to extend that to other groups that may not have a configured identity provider. So we still want those enterprise customers to be able to have some element of control over the users that are actually accessing their group. And extending group managed accounts to all groups, I think, is a good first step to do that. The way we're going to do that in 12.10 is we're going to work on decoupling SSO from group managed accounts on the back end. We're going to spend some time waiting for some feedback, seeking out some feedback from customers that are using the current configuration, which is SSO SAML plus group managed accounts in its current state. And we're also going to work on introducing an administration menu for group owners, which will contain the current configuration settings for SSO SAML and group managed accounts, and will also provide us a location so that we can start introducing things like more comprehensive user management, which currently isn't something we provide as a great solution to enterprise folks on our SaaS offering. So hopefully these will be some big improvements going forward over the next few months. Any questions?
That's awesome, Luca. Like the administration menu, to be clear, that's something that do we think that we're going to have a new role for that, or is that going to be like something that group owners have just for groups using group managed accounts?
So yeah, that's a good question. There isn't going to be a new role for it at the moment. This is just going to be a new administration menu for group owners, and it's not changing anything as yet. All we're doing is we're bringing settings that currently exist under the general settings menu and making it more discoverable for folks that behave as administrators of their group. So we're trying to create this feeling as if you're actually contained within your own instance on GitLab.com rather than just in a group and having limited control and autonomy over what you need to do day to day as an admin.
Cool.
Anyone else have any questions?
Just a comment. I'm super stoked for that feature to be coming out because I know there's a lot of dynamic around kind of group managed everything. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what feedback we get from it.
Oh, same here. Like we're adding like administration for group owners. That's very cool. Like I know, Luca, I know you have big plans and like where you'd like to take that, but I think that's going to be hugely exciting, especially for users on GitLab.com. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. I'm glad. User management is another thing that I'm excited about for the future too. It's something that we've been very much asked for from a lot of customers. So this provides a really good platform for us to start thinking about that seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see like eventually being able to like add, delete users with administration.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal.
Sweet. Awesome. Cool. Thanks. Matt, I think over to you.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. I'll go ahead and start sharing as soon as I figure out the right one. I think it's this one. Should be MVC apply compliance project topics. Okay. So yeah, so for the compliance group, our focus is largely around the compliance dashboard and audit management. I would say the two themes. The first issue we're looking at is an MVC for basically helping our customers with labeling their projects, because part of the challenge we've had lately with some implementations is that how do you apply certain settings or enforcements to projects that, you know, might be the minority of the larger project set. You know, they might have hundreds or thousands of projects, but only maybe a dozen of them actually require some strict enforcement or policy. And so we felt that the good first iteration would be, let's leverage project topics so that we can have customers tell us what projects we should be enforcing these things for. And so this first iteration would basically define a predefined list of here are the compliance frameworks that we find are the most common on our platform. And if you label a project with one of these topics, we'll basically track that label so that we can eventually do things like report on it in the compliance dashboard to show you data around those projects, their compliance status, things like pipeline results, those sorts of things. But it also gives us an ability to give better flexibility or control over applying those enforcement settings. So in 12.8, as one example, we gave admins the ability to restrict merge request approval rules in all projects, but that's a little too broad, a little too heavy-handed. So this would enable us to build out an experience that says, yes, apply this strict enforcement only for projects that are labeled with SOX or HIPAA topics, as one example. So we felt this was a fundamental building block for a few different areas in the compliance group. And so just to give kind of a quick little example of that, this project view on the right side here is what we'd like to try to manifest in the current projects listing. So when you go and view all the projects in your group, you could see at a high level these project topics. When you click into the project, it would be visible there as well. And then in the compliance dashboard, which this is a rough prototype for, this is how we could surface those insights at that higher level.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
How do you know which project topics are relevant for compliance and which are not?
What do you mean relevant for compliance?
So project topics, as far as I understand it, are a way of tagging projects. As you, you said, on GitLab.com, someone might tag a project with Python, might tag it with whatever language that they're using. How do you know? Do all project topics appear in that list?
So for the compliance dashboard, as far as surfacing those insights, we would be looking for those specific topics.
Cool.
So if a project has one of these 7 or 8 predefined ones, then we'll pull it into this view. If it doesn't have one of those, we won't pull it into this view. That's the initial plan anyway.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Sure.
Cool.
Great question. Thank you. The other issue we're adding is another iteration on the compliance dashboard to surface pipeline results. Several of our conversations with customers have largely been around this idea of aggregating what they consider to be kind of these key data points around compliance. And so kind of the long-term vision or goal for the compliance dashboard is the stakeholder or the user whose day-to-day job or common ask of them involves these asks from their internal or external auditors is by living on this page, the compliance dashboard view, they can answer all of the important questions that are being asked of them. If we can build this out to the point where they never have to leave that page to do that part of their job, I consider that a win, and that's kind of my hierarchy goal for this. But part of that is aggregating this type of data there. And one of the challenges here is that there can be several pipelines associated with the merge request, and trying to navigate what do we show, what's relevant. That's certainly part of the conversation. But I think figuring that out and overcoming that challenge will be important to surfacing those insights in a way that's relevant to this compliance context. And then the last issue, did you have a question, somebody?
Oh, yeah, it was me. I was actually, it's not a question. I was just going to say, I really like the call out of saying that you want to be able to make it so that they don't have to leave this page to do their job. I think that's a really nice thing to highlight because it's, I mean, our product is a, you know, it's a one tool for everything. So kind of extending that even further and saying like, you don't need to leave this product to do your job day to day. Like just highlighting little features like that that make that goal a little bit more clear, I think is really cool. So yeah, good, thumbs up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for the feedback.
+1.
Thank you both. And so the third issue we're focused on for 1210 is going to be this concept of essentially simplifying and automating these repeatable workflows. What we found is that there's a pain point around trying to manage evidence artifacts and collecting this data that our day-to-day users are being asked for. The common example is I might be a group owner for a GitLab instance, and somebody from my internal audit or compliance team says, I want to see the chain of custody for this release, or I want to see all of the merge requests and pipelines associated with this project for the last 6 months or the last 3 weeks, whatever that timeline might be. And so right now I have to go and collect that evidence, give it to them. And so the long-term vision for this is let's automatically create these issues. Each issue maps to a very specific control or requirement in a particular compliance framework, in this case, the HIPAA audit protocol. And in that long-term solution, what would happen is as I'm working day-to-day in GitLab, automatically GitLab is just generating artifacts and placing them into those respective issues. So at the end of the day, all I have to do is maybe export all of the issues, which would have all those artifacts, and then send it over to audit, or better yet, create a dedicated project where my auditors can work and that evidence is being collected for them. And so this first MVC we're aiming for is to leverage project templates to say, when you create a new project, select the HIPAA audit protocol, and we'll populate that with the currently 180 issues that map to the respective controls in that protocol. So right now it solves a few different problems in that experience, and that you may want your auditors to have access to GitLab for the purposes of maybe managing the audit or collecting evidence and aggregating it in one place, but you maybe don't want them to have additional permissions in a particular project. So this isolates the project and the work that's happening there. You might, as a GitLab user, after you've gone through the painstaking process of finding all of this data, it might be easier to simply dump it into one of these issues that's already in the GitLab application, and then exporting that to send it to your auditor, or telling your auditor, hey, log in and go view it, it's updated. So you can take advantage of some of these simplified workflows that help you, to your point, Luca, stay within GitLab. It's an environment you're familiar with. You can leverage things like labels, milestones, due dates, all of that. But ideally, it's all about that long-term goal of automating as much as we can, so that the day-to-day users of GitLab don't have to worry about it. It's no longer a headache. It's, oh, I don't have to worry about it. It's all just taken care of. I see that this is all being put into those issues, and it's just simpler for everyone. So I think that pretty much sums up.
Thanks a lot, Matt. This is cool. This is my ignorance speaking, but can you tell me like a little bit more about what you do with the evidence once? So we generate 180 issues. What does someone actually do with those issues at that point?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it, like everything in our industry, it depends.
Right.
So there's a couple of ways that organizations are set up. Generally speaking, if you're a large enough entity, you have a dedicated audit or compliance team. Their primary responsibility is doing kind of like a day-to-day or week-to-week type of audit to make sure that what we say we do, which is our policies, are actually put into practice, and collecting evidence to prove that. And so they might ask me for, hey, send me the merge request artifact or the release artifact for that last push that we made to production. Show me the audit logs for the last 3 weeks of login failures and successes. Show me the password reset and like take a screenshot of that. Take a screenshot of the pipelines. And so it can range in terms of what that evidence artifact is, or plural, what they are. because every organization is going to approach it differently, but ultimately what they're trying to do is collect all of the proof to then hand off to an external auditor, because it'll always be a third-party independent auditor, to say, here's proof that we're meeting the controls of this external framework, like PCI. If PCI control 2.1.6 says all users must have strong passwords, you have to show them the proof, screenshots, policy, all that, that they can reasonably conclude, yes, you say you're doing it, I see that you're doing it, you show me proof you're doing it. So that's kind of the workflow.
So when someone goes ahead and create, because I'm thinking like, so we have 180 issues, and someone, a human being, will go in and create and comment or add whatever evidence that they need to meet whatever particular like issue is created. Mm-hmm. At that point, I wonder like, how do they take that and provide that to their auditor? Because what I'm thinking is, well, if they're all in issues, like the export CSV is like a button that you can kind of hit, but I don't think that it goes into exceptional depth in terms of like, here's every single comment from every single one of your issues in your issue board. Yeah. I wonder if like a future iteration that we can consider is like, a deep download of like all of the, just like click on this button, download everything that's in the issue, like the issue tracker, into like a CSV or some type of like structured format that you can then you can add hand to an auditor. So you can say, hey, here's all the issues, like human beings work on them. Once we're done and we're kind of like ready to hand this off to a third party, click this button and then hand them this file and then you're done.
Yeah, I agree. That's certainly one path. The other path, which I think is ideal, is working towards kind of that thought leadership credibility stance for GitLab and say, look, GitLab should be the standard for managing an audit, or at least in the context of what we are in scope for. Because you could even then say, here, auditor, here's the access to this one project, which is kind of cool because it shows you're kind of isolating this project and that auditor couldn't go do anything they shouldn't be able to do. But then they can just kind of click through the issues themselves and kind of check off their own boxes in whatever channel or medium that is. Another added benefit is you could archive the project or maybe close the issues and reopen them later, and that also maintains its own kind of audit trail, right? An audit trail of the audit. So you can even pull from last year. So if I'm doing this annually or even quarterly, I can look back to the previous evidence and say, actually, you know what, that's still applicable. Let me pull that over. And so you end up saving a lot of time in that way as well. Yep. So rather than 180 pieces of evidence, maybe it's only 100. But that translates into dozens, if not hundreds of hours of people hours trying to find all of that.
That's cool. Makes sense. Thanks a lot. Harris, I think over to you.
Cool. Let me tell you what import will be working on. So sharing my planning issues. So we have two issues that are tied to our direction that I want to talk about. I also want to just talk a little bit about the longer term vision for import. And in this, in 12.10, we plan to start gathering some of the metrics as well as doing some UX discovery that is going to inform future milestones. So that's one of the goals for 12.10 for us, is actually to get data now so we could use it to plan better our future milestones. That said, we're gonna have some bias for action too, and not wait until all the research has been done to actually move some things forward, especially some things where we know we can make some quick improvements. So the first issue I want to talk about is just the user experience for creating the project. This is part of the overall rethinking of the user experience for the import. And you know, I say always that every user deserves a great user experience, including a user who's just like one time importing something into GitLab, and sometimes especially that user, because that is the first impression they might have of GitLab. Could be them trying to move their work into GitLab, and we want that first impression to be a great one for the user. So part of that user experience is really this one view that we have when we create a new project. So this is the view I'm talking about. The when you're looking at the list of your projects and you click that green button that says new project, you land here. There are a couple of issues that we've identified with this view that we're going to try to iterate on and see if a different flow might be a better one, and then try to measure the impact and try to measure the user experience that we create to see if we're moving in the right direction or not. The issues we're talking about is sort of the discoverability of the options for creating a new project from template and creating a new project from an import from an external source. Just kind of, a user who lands here and there's a lot of text and there's some fields and a green button, people tend to just follow the visual cues. And one of, like a main cue on this view is that I need to type in the project name. I need to maybe add a description, make a decision whether this is private and public, and then hit the green button. If you do that, you have actually missed your opportunity to import your data from wherever it is right now, and you've also missed the opportunity to create to create a new project from a template, because that choice is no longer available as soon as you create the project. So you may or may not have noticed these tabs. So a lot of times, if you don't notice the tabs, you'll end up creating a project and you will no longer have the ability to do that. If you have noticed these tabs, you could also make an assumption that this is a wizard, a type of checkout experience online, where you are going to be taken from tab to tab, and you're going to fill out a lot of things, and eventually your project will be created. And if you make that assumption and you feel like, once I've filled out this first tab and hit next, or whatever the green button is, you may assume that you're going to be taken to to the place where you can pick a template or import, but that's also not the case. Like, once you fill this out, hit the green button, you will no longer be able to do that. So trying to sort of see what a small change would be that could counteract this user experience, we've kind of come up with an approach where at the very beginning, so this is a mock-up, we're gonna get a better looking design soon, but this is sort of the flow that we're thinking about, and that is, from the very top level view, you're presented with several larger choices that all look equal to each other, and you kind of have to make a selection whether this is a new empty project, is this coming from an import. And we're still toying sort of with whether the templates are going to be a top level choice here. So there would be a blank project template import. Right now, the mockup shows this differently, as in, if you select a new project, your choices are then to either start a blank project or a project that starts with a template. Still haven't finalized the choice there of how that's going to flow. But the idea is that we're going to present the user with the choices so that it's obvious to them that it's going to be either going down the path of creating a new project or going down this other path of importing. And it's not, and once they make that conscious choice, we're hoping to actually be able to catch more people who are thinking about importing, and and we're going to help them avoid going down the wrong path in the flow. So that's the change that we're thinking about doing in this release, to kind of keep the ball moving and have the bias toward action, while we're still doing some of the larger research around exactly how all this is going to play out, because some of the imports happen here at the new project page. Some of them can happen at some of them actually have a button on top of the issues list to import issues. And once we start talking about this last solution, group import export, this will be something that is going to live above the project. So this is going to be a choice for us when creating a new group. to be able to actually just migrate a group from another instance of GitLab. So this is the other issue from our direction. And currently, we do have an API-based solution where you are able to pull the group information from the API, overlay that with the project export import information that exists where we actually can export a project into a file and then import it into a new instance. However, all that requires a lot of manual steps, a lot of scripting, and it is not an easy, one button click to move your group from one instance of GitLab to another. It is actually, it involves a lot of manual data data manipulation. So the solution that we want to have, the full solution, is to have one place where you're going to be able to specify which group, which subgroups, projects, specify a subset or your entire set of data in one GitLab instance and migrate that to another instance of GitLab one-to-one where everything is going to arrive there. Your projects, your groups, your settings, your epics, your issues, everything there, right? So that is the big vision. And in 12.10, in this particular issue, we're going to find the smallest change we can make to take us in that direction. We're still teasing out the details, but we're going to try to actually expose or hide the API or to put the API calls that you can currently make behind the button that looks similar to how a new project works. So similar to being able to say, okay, I want to do a GitLab export, you should be able to do that for a group when you create a new group. That solution is might be potentially temporary, so we will make this change, and then once we finalize our UX research, the experience might still change from this solution, but we actually want to make a move in that direction to start sort of building the ability to move groups from instance to instance into GitLab. So this will be that MVC with the user experience that takes you step away from the API. So thoughts and questions on sort of what we're approaching? Are these the right things to work on, and how you like the solutions or the MVCs?
I think it's super interesting. I think that the new project creation page, I believe when I looked at which pages users use the most, that's, I think, top 3, one of the most common things a user does, and there's a lot of room for improvement. So I love that we're thinking about the UX more fundamentally and how we can improve it. Thanks for sharing the Envision prototype, even though it's a bit early. One thing that I linked an issue in the agenda doc for the managed kickoffs under any questions, and one thing that I just wanted to show you this issue, which was something that we did a long time ago when we were doing new project flow exploration. And I'll hijack screen share for just a second.
Please do.
This is about a year ago or so when we did this. But we were trying to understand how we can improve this flow. So there's some information here and some notes and some journey mapping here that might be interesting. One idea that I had was I was inspired by Google Docs, for instance, which is something that, like, when you click new project, like you showed all the fields that you kind of need to run through and actually like type in before we actually are able to get you to that magic moment of like, hey, here's your project. I think Google Docs is pretty cool because you click on Google Docs and it just dumps you into a document, and then you can edit in line what the title is, what your sharing settings are, but like you're immediately doing something productive, right? So whenever like we have a choice or the ability to consider how we can remove steps from the process, we should kind of definitely consider that. Like this might be one of those opportunities where like you click on new project, boom, you're in a repository. And then within that flow, you can say like, oh, actually, I want to import from a source. And then so you can click on, but if you're happy with the blank project, as many users are, you can navigate away, and we just assume that that's, you're going to do that and use a blank project. You can say like, oh, but you can also use a template like to import stuff and pull that information into this repo, or you can also use it, import from another source or something. But immediately they're getting value without having to kind of like struggle through that typing. So whenever we have like a lengthy flow, always think about like, hey, can we take steps out? Like, what would that experience look like?
That's a great idea, Ed. I'm a big fan of some of those websites where you can just go and start prototyping things without ever giving them email or signing up or doing anything. You go there, you land, and it's already editable and it's ready to go. And then later on, I can solve for all these other things. Do I need to move something in? Do I need to sign up for it? Do I need to save it? Like, we'll figure that out. But here, just start working right now. Is a great way to go. So I like that. I think so. We gave that some thought, actually, and I think where we want to get is the ability to merge projects, really, because at that point, if you already started some work and you have some of the data in the project that you have, any kind of an import is going to merge additional data into it. So we do want to be able to do that. I think it's very restrictive right now that the only place where we let you import or apply template is before we even create the project. I think we should be able to do it further down. Like once the project is created, we should be able to still get your data into it on top of that. So I do think that's a great final goal, and I definitely like the user experience of, hey, you wanna work. Here's a repo. Here's a board. Everything's empty. Just put an issue here and start putting files there or whatever. Or we'll put just a README file in there for you, and you just get going. And then we'll ask you for what's your project name later, who you are, and all these things. We can figure this out along the way. But we want you to get going with the work. So
yeah, like Heroku, for instance,
awesome.
doesn't ask you like what you want to name your app. It just gives you some funky name, and it's like,
Yep.
hey, cool, you can change this later on if you want.
And
to.
maybe it's good enough, right?
Yeah, maybe it's good enough for sure.
Yeah.